This video is sponsored by Classic Football Shirts, the best place to get your classic and vintage football shirts. To get cheap retro Palace shirts, click the link in the description below. And for an extra 10% off, use the code CFSPJ10 at checkout. Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenbrook, and in today's podcast, I'll be looking over the game against Watford by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Roy Hodgson, Martin Kelly and Joe Ward after the game. So let's begin. Palace suffered back-to-back defeats for the first time since March as Watford ran out winners at Vicarage Road, despite Wilfried Zaha becoming the club's all-time top Premier League scorer. Roy Hodgson's team were the better in a feisty first half, but Ben Foster pulled off a pair of good saves to deny Christian Benteke and James McArthur. But after the break, the Hornets were quick out of the traps and took the lead via a Roberto Pereyra curler. Fortune favoured the hosts on 70 minutes when they doubled their lead with a Jose Holebas cross shot, but Zaha pulled one back 7 minutes later to notch his 24th top-flight goal to surpass Chris Armstrong, and in stoppage time Joe Ward sent a header just wide of the mark to ensure that Palace tasted defeat at the venue for the first time since 2009. Things began badly for them in the warm-up when James Tonkins limped off and was replaced by Martin Kelly, but when proceedings did get underway, the first 10 minutes resembled a battleground, and the aftermath of which left the visitors also feeling hard done by. The hosts were extremely fortunate to have their full contingent on the field after Etienne Capoue aggressively stamped on Zaha's Achilles and escaped with a booking. A decision that looked even more worse 2 minutes later when the Palace winger also had his name taken despite not even making contact with Holebas. And then Darren Janmaat was unpunished following a poor challenge on Patrick Van Aanholt. Eventually, a game of football broke out thanks to some fine, crisp passing by Palace, which helped them carve out two excellent opportunities after fine work by ex-Hornet Andros Townsend. On the occasion of his 150th Premier League appearance, he firstly whipped the cross onto the head of Benteke, which Forster did well to acrobatically swat away, and then again more good work from by the winger saw him create a one-on-one opportunity from McArthur, which Forster once again managed to thwart with a good save. The Scotsman atoned for his miss by blocking a goal-bound volley by Pereyra as the Hornets began to build up some pressure of their own, and after a double dummy by Decore and Troy Deeney, Pereyra then fired straight into the arms of Hennessy. Typically for a British bank holiday, rain fell throughout, and as the pitch became slicker, it became trickier for Hodgson's team to execute their neat play, which saw the momentum shift a little. Just before the break, Janmaat screwed wide, and then after the restart, Wayne Hennessy bravely blocked a Raul Hughes close-range blast with midriff, before Decore and Pereyra fired over in quick succession. And on 53 minutes, the Hornets capitalised when they were at their most dominant. After winning the ball off Zaha, Craig Cathcart fed Capoue, who embarked on a 40-yard run before finding Pereyra, and after cutting inside onto his right foot, he bent the ball around Hennessy's dive and found the bottom corner to score his third of the campaign. It took Palace 15 minutes to recover positively from the setback of falling behind, and they went a whisker away from drawing level when Mamadou Sakho clipped the ball onto the chest of Benteke, who saw a shot on the turn flash over the crossbar and post, but that proved the big moment as on 70 minutes Watford grabbed the second goal to put the game to bed. Holebas took a throw on the right which was cleared to Janmaat, who returned it to his fellow fullback, and after bringing the ball back onto his right foot, he attempted to send a cross to the back post, but a mixture of a miscue and possibly the wind saw it sail over the outstretched Hennessy and into the top corner. Things looked bleak for the Eagles at that point, but on 78 minutes they were given a lifeline when Zaha forced some boos back down the throats of the home fans. He picked up the ball on the left and slipped the ball between two defenders to substitute Max Meyer, and the German returned it to Zaha, who flashed a shot through Forster to quickly reduce the arrears, breaking Palace's Premier League record in the process. The Eagles just needed one more big chance to snatch a dramatic comeback, and in the 4th minute of injury time it arrived, when a corner was sent into the packed penalty area, but Ward sent a free header fractions wide of the mark to end Palace's unbeaten run on the road at 5 games. It was an afternoon where very little went Roy Hodgson's way. Crystal Palace fell to a 2-1 defeat at the hands of Watford, who have taken 9 points from 9 in the Premier League. Both sides contributed to the fiercely competitive contest, but in the end it was the Hornets who took the spoils. let's get to work on the hottest topics to arise from the weekend. A fair result. Despite the fact the result went in Watford's favour, Palace have every right to feel aggrieved. The Eagles dominated play for large spells in the first half, and if it wasn't for 2 world-class saves from Ben Foster, they could have been 2-0 up within 15 minutes. Perhaps it was that inability to kill games off which proved costly, as Watford flew out of the blocks and took the game to Palace in the second half. One goal of real quality and another of pure good luck gave the hosts a 2-0 lead, and while Wilfried Zaha got a late reply, it wasn't enough to grab a point for Palace, something which Roy Hodgson said would have been truly deserved. Football is a ruthless game, and while the Eagles would feel they could have got more, it would go down as a lesson learned that they have to strike when the iron's hot. The treatment of Wilfried Zaha. He's used to being dubbed public enemy number 1, but Wilf Zaha was certainly made to feel unwelcome on his trip to Vicarage Road. The forward was on the receiving end of several robust challenges, as well as being loudly booed by the home fans throughout, something which wouldn't be held by Roy Hodgson's comments on Harry the Hornet. One challenge which seemed to slip under the radar somewhat was Edgin Capu's challenge early on in the first half, which saw Zaha bundled to the floor, with the Watford man only receiving a yellow card. While the challenge appeared fairly innocuous at first glance, replay showed a slightly more sinister side to the challenge, with many insisting Capu should have seen red for it. Hodgson said that the rough treatment received stopped Zaha from playing his natural game, something which you can't argue when you see how his performance panned out. He did manage to get a goal at the end, but Zaha would have hoped for more as he looked to silence his critics as what will surely be one of his coldest welcomes this season. An unused weapon. We've already discussed how Palace could have made more of their dominance in the first half, and that point very much ties into that. Patrick Vanana has made a name for himself as a defender who's most dangerous when going forward, something which the Eagles simply didn't utilise enough here. Watford's system is fairly similar to Palace in that they use the fullbacks for width, while the likes of Will Hughes in right midfield will drift inside, and this created acres of space for Vanana down the left. On a handful of occasions the Dutch defender was screaming for the ball on the left flank, but those in midfield failed to see him. The Hornets aren't the most polished side in defence, and leaving a player like Vanana 1-on-1 with Darren Janmaat isn't something which Watford would have wanted to see. If Palace are to fully make use of their offensive weapons, it's crucial that the fullback is used to his full potential. A last-minute alteration. It wasn't the ideal preparation for Martin Kelly, who was drafted into the Palace starting 11 just 20 minutes before kick-off. James Tompkins pulled out in the warm-up, with Roy Hodgson revealing it was a result of a calf strain, but this left the former Liverpool man a little cold in his introduction. He faced a difficult afternoon against Troy Deeney, and with Joe Ward also coming into the starting 11, the right side of Palace's defence appeared a little shaky. Roberto Pereyra is a classy player, and his ability to cut inside from the flank caused all kinds of problems for the likes of Kelly and Ward, who simply couldn't handle him. You would argue that this wasn't entirely Kelly's fault after the way he was thrust into the starting 11, but Tompkins' injury certainly seemed to play into Watford's hands as the game unfolded. So I'm now going to move on to the player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. And also, if you're on Facebook, do feel free to join our Facebook group, which is a really great place to join in with discussions and also share your opinions with other fans. And much like a forum, it's a great place to come on there, not only look at other people's opinion, but also share your opinion so that others can have your sort of general view of the game or anything to do with Palace. But as I said there, if you do want a place to get all the latest Palace news, especially during the transfer window where we regularly update you with all the latest rumours, then of course do head over to our Twitter page and our Facebook page at Crystal Palace. And as well as that, we also have discussions and things as well, so if you do want to keep up to date, then of course you can follow us on there. And of course the Facebook group, as I've already mentioned, is much like a forum. If you do want to get involved with us, get in contact with us, or even just read what other people are saying, then of course do head over there and you will be accepted into the group. Now if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then of course you can drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, where you rate the players' performances from 1 to 10, with obviously 10 being the best. And obviously, even if you don't want to do this, you can comment with your general views of the game. Whether you're a Watford or Palace fan, do feel free to comment below with your views of the game. Was it a red card? Do you think that Watford deserved to win? Do you think all different things you could basically think of the game? Of course, do feel free to comment them below, because much like a forum, I'm someone who likes to go back onto the video, read what others had to say rather than just having my own opinion, and basically just have a discussion with others. So if you have got a different opinion to mine, then of course do feel free to comment it below so that I can read it. But also other people who come to the video, whether they're Watford or Palace fans, they don't just want to listen to what I have to say about the game, they might want to read your comments as well. So do obviously feel free to share your opinion in the comment section below. Now, of course, if you do want to follow any of these social media pages or join the Facebook group, as I've already mentioned, then do check all the links that will be in the description below. But we're now going to move on to the player ratings. We're going to start in goal with Wayne Hennessy. Now, personally for me, I think he had a pretty good performance once again, and I think he does deserve the 6 I've given him. Now, in terms of what he did in the game, which I was quite impressed with, is that he made some very good routine saves throughout the game. So what we talked about last season is the fact that he was quite inconsistent. You know, he could have one fantastic, 7, 8 out of 10 game, and then we'll sort of 3-4 games in a row will have really bad games. Now, the start of this season and obviously the end of last season, so he's carrying on that form, but he's been very consistent of late, and it's great to see. And this was another performance where actually, even though we lost the game, you can't really put any blame really on Hennessy, so that's why I've given him the 6, because I think his overall performance was really good. Now, although I said he made some very good routine saves, stopping Watford and obviously at certain points in the game just keeping us in it. So when we were 0-0, he was keeping us in the game. When we were 2 goals down, he was still keeping us in the game to make sure that it wouldn't go on to 3, maybe even 4 goals. So obviously Hennessy making these crucial routine saves throughout the game was obviously quite impressive as well. But what I've got to say is that although Watford did play very well in the game and probably arguably you could say dominated the game, they never really tested Hennessy, which you could say maybe it's just because Watford didn't have anything in the final third and it was just their midfielders scoring goals. Or you could just say that actually, even though the defence didn't have the best game, the defence gave enough cover that obviously Hennessy wasn't really, tested that much. But overall, I do, like I said, really very good in the fact that he was making these saves, and I do think a 6 sort of warrants that, that result I've given him. Now, to be honest, I think in the first half especially, I think he was one of our better players. I think he played really well up until that second half, and then maybe you could say in the second half, after half time, he sort of dropped off a little bit, but that's not to say that he was bad. It's just the fact that because he was making all these routine saves, especially in that first half, the second half was slightly disappointing. And obviously when you concede 2 goals, ultimately you could say he should dive down lower for the first one. Ultimately for me, I think because there's so many players in the box, you can't really blame him for that. And obviously the other one was a complete fluke, but you could argue maybe Hennessy, rather than sort of tracking back, maybe he should just try and jump and block the ball, as opposed to sort of, like I said, trying to track back and try and palm it out. But whatever it is, I personally don't think there's much blame on Hennessy for the goals, hence why I've given him the 6. Now, the final point I, picked up from Hennessy's performance, and I've seen a few people talk about this of late, is actually his distribution was a bit flaky, a bit off at times, but still there were a few encouraging moments in the fact that he was quite quick to release the ball and obviously start attacks. Now, I've talked about quite a lot last season in the fact that Hennessy's distribution, since Dean Kiley came in, the goalkeeping coach, I talked about it quite a lot last season in the fact that Hennessy's distribution, obviously his general gameplay as well, but especially that distribution was improving as the games went on, and especially the end of last season I thought his distribution was very good. Now obviously he's not the best player, he's not necessarily someone like Gaeta, who literally for all his basically playing career has been playing out the back, so his passing range is good. Obviously we know Hennessy, he's a big lump, he's very good at clearing the ball long, but actually end of last season we saw a little bit more in the fact that he can actually target these clearances to get to Benteke, to get to Zaha, to get to someone like Loftus-Cheek when we had him on the wing. So the fact that Hennessy was able to do that last season was quite impressive. But obviously starting the new season here, he looks a bit flaky, in the fact that some of his distribution, he's just pumping it long, and quite a lot of the time it's going out for touch, or it's going out, or sorry, it's going out for touch, or it's obviously getting intercepted by the opposition. So that's something that maybe he could work on, because other than his distribution, his performances this season have been very good, and as shown by the Liverpool and obviously the Fulham game, he's obviously up there with the man of the match. So his performances are good recently, and obviously there were quite a few encouraging moments in this game, but if he just improved his distribution even more, I probably could have given him a 7 for the game. But also, it's quite important playing the ball out from the back. So if his distribution had been better, we probably could have had more domination on the ball. We could have had more control in the fact that we can get the ball up to Benteke and actually have more of an attacking threat. But overall, goalkeeper Wayne Hennessy, going to give him a 6. I think, like I've said already, made some good saves throughout the game. Some of them routine, some of them a bit better. Yes, he wasn't ultimately not really tested much by the Watford defence, and although his distribution was a bit shaky, I did think there was quite a few encouraging moments of his display. So we're going to move on now to the right back Joe Ward, and I'm going to give him a 5 for his performance. Now this is someone who's come up for quite a lot of criticism, not only in this game but certainly the end of last season, where he's not necessarily been as great as he has been in the past, and obviously Aaron Wan-Bissaka's come into the side and took his place. Now obviously we all know that Joe Ward was going to start the game, obviously because Aaron Wan-Bissaka was suspended, and actually considering You know, Joe Ward, he may not have been the best last season. He still came into this game, put a shift in, didn't do too much wrong, other than sort of letting the defenders get past him too easily for the goal, or for the goals rather. Other than that, I think he had a relatively average performance, hence why I've given him a 5. Now, to be honest, Roberto Pereyra, he's had a fantastic start to the season for Watford, and ultimately you can understand Joe Ward, he's not the fastest player, he had a tough afternoon against him, so I wasn't quite surprised there. You know, you look back to last season, Joe Ward got turned horrendously by Marcus Rashford, so that was an example of actually Joe Ward hasn't quite got the pace to deal with forwards like that, and Roberto Pereyra was exactly the same here against Watford, where he was just having the joy down that left hand side for Watford, basically because Joe Ward couldn't really keep up with him. And to be honest, for a numerous amount of times he continuously kept getting caught out, which just goes to show actually Joe Ward, yes, he may be good at dealing with certain defenders, but when he's, you know, faced up against these really fast trickery players, it's actually quite difficult for him. Now, of course, Watford's goals, you know, I've talked about it already. You know, one of them was a fantastic goal, the first one, you know, cutting inside. You could argue that maybe Joe Ward should have closed him down earlier, and rather than trying to sort of play him out wide, he should have just gone into him, either made a tackle or just sort of tried to clear the ball, as opposed to trying to play him or get him to play on that flank. And then the other one was obviously the cross into the area. The player's come out himself and said it was a cross, not a shot on goal. Obviously, you can't help when it's windy and the ball gets put directed into the top corner. But certainly, him and Andros Townsend should have done a better job in terms of stopping that cross getting into the area in the first place. You know, even if it's sticking out a leg, or even if it's just sort of putting your body in the way of the player so he can't get the cross in, whatever it is, maybe he could have done better there. But as I've already mentioned, I did think he struggled to contain Pereyra for the most part, but he did make a couple of good clearances. So, like I've said already, you know, Joe Ward, he may not have been fantastic, but even though he struggled against Pereyra, he still made a couple of good clearances, and that's why I haven't given him a 4, as many people have given him, purely based on the fact that actually there were a few good clearances, and of course you've got to look at the positives and negatives of every player's performance. Now, to be honest, we all were quite disappointed after the game. Yes, their performance wasn't great, but we had a fantastic chance to equalise. I think it was in the 94th minute. You know, a corner's whipped into the box. Joe Ward's free in the box. He's headed it down, and it's gone just wide. Now, obviously, it's disappointing, and people would say, oh, that's an easy header, you should be doing it. But think about it, Joe Ward, he's not renowned for his headering ability, and to be honest, it shouldn't have to come down to him to score the goal. We should have made changes earlier on in the game and actually tried to get an equaliser before added time. So ultimately, you could argue, yes, Joe Ward should have done better with that header, and it would have really, really uplifted basically the crowd and the fans and stuff. But you've got to look at it and go, actually, we should have actually already had the equaliser if we were really pushing for one. If we really wanted an equaliser, we should have got it beforehand, and we should have made changes earlier. But because we didn't, it ultimately leaves you with one chance in the last minute of the game, and if you don't take it, you're punished and you go on to lose the game. And ultimately, that's what really happened. But to be honest, that miss sort of summed up Joe Ward's performance in the fact that he got into a good area, which was good, but then he didn't finish off his chance. And basically, that was sort of his theme throughout the whole game. You know, he'd done a few good things, done a few bad things. So overall, not really the best performance, but I do think he does deserve that 5. But certainly with Wan-Bissaka coming off the ban, obviously for his red card, he's definitely coming straight back in, and obviously Joe Ward can go onto the bench. But this performance here, yes, it wasn't the greatest, but it does sort of give me a bit of confidence that we've got at least we've got a little bit of competent cover, let's say, at right back, because it wasn't the worst performance. And when you consider the trickery and the high quality of the opposition he was playing against, you can understand him to struggle a bit. So Joe Ward here, a 5 for him. Not the worst, not the best performance, but certainly a good backup player. So now I'm going to move on to the first of our central defenders, and that is Martin Kelly, who I'm also going to give a 5. Now, to be honest, we all expected Tompkins and Sakho to start. That's what I predicted, and that was the starting 11, and that was before James Tompkins felt his calf. I believe it was in the warm-up, and obviously Martin Kelly off the bench got drafted in, and I think Salu Kaikai took Martin Kelly's place on the bench. Now, obviously, when you get drafted in last minute, obviously you haven't been preparing with the team. You know, you're not really... Well, I wouldn't say you're not really in a state of mind to start the game, but I think you would say you're not necessarily prepared in terms of the tactical side, in the fact that you're put in last minute inside the defence. Now, what you've got to consider is, yes, we lost the game, but we lost 2 of our first team defenders basically in this game, in Aaron Wan-Bissaka and James Tomkins. So you can understand the fact that you've gone through all of this preparation before the game in training, and then 2 of your players can't play in that game, and at the last minute you're throwing in 2 other players. So you can understand the defence being a bit misjointed, and certainly it did. Martin Kelly for parts of the game did look a bit uncomfortable, and that's just because of how good Watford's attack was, and obviously they've been playing quite good this season. But as you've heard in the player ratings, you know, it's quite difficult when a player's draft, it was the 5 things we learned actually. What we picked up from that is the fact that Martin Kelly, when you put a player in last minute, obviously they could do well and they could, you know, basically put in a performance which you don't expect, or they could just, because they weren't prepared necessarily to start the game, you know, you can understand them finding it a bit difficult. Now, to be honest, in the circumstances and in the fact that he came in late into the game, I think he done pretty well, relatively well, and to his credit, he didn't look like a problem defensively. Now, obviously we conceded 2 goals and I've given him a 5 rating. The only reason I've done that for him is just that, you know, he wasn't fantastic, and I can't really give him a 6 for a performance where we conceded 2 goals, and although he wasn't directly involved in them, I think his overall defensive play wasn't quite good enough to get that 6. But to be honest, like I've said already, yes, he didn't do fantastic, and considering the circumstances you can understand that, but they weren't easy opponents, and I've got to highlight this quite a lot because people would say, oh, we should be beating Watford, we haven't lost there since 2009. Actually, if you look at it, Watford this season, and especially sort of the end of last season, they were performing really well. Now, although Watford, they always seem to drop off towards the end of the season, I think this season they could be having a season where they don't drop off, because based on this performance here, even though they didn't play fantastic, they still ground out a result, which goes to show how good they're playing this season. Now, the final point really for me to pick up about Martin Kelly's performance, and that's basically just his distribution. Now, I talked a bit with, you know, Wayne Hennessy about his distribution being slightly off, not being as good as, you know, it normally has been, you know, especially end of last season. Martin Kelly's one of these players, once again, goes back to that point in being brought into the side late on. His distribution wasn't that great, and I'm sure that if Tomkins had have started, because Tomkins and Sacco have played together this season, and that's obviously the back end of last season, they're very good at playing the ball out from the back. And obviously if you take one of these players out and put someone like Martin Kelly, who's basically similar to Damien Delaney in the fact that he likes to put the ball in the air as opposed to sort of playing it out from the back, when you've got that, you can understand his distribution being a bit nervous, let's say. Now, it wasn't an issue because we obviously can play Route 1 football, or we can play this expansive style of football, so it wasn't an issue that he couldn't necessarily play it out from the back that well. But obviously that's just the thing I have to pick up about his performance. Now, that just goes to show that actually, although it was a pretty competent defensive performance from him, I do think that the reason I've given him a 5 is just because that distribution let him down a little bit as well. And that's not to say he had a bad performance, I just don't think he was as good as, let's say, Tomkins probably would have been if he was playing in that position. But Martin Kelly here, playing central defence, obviously came in last minute for Tomkins, looked a little bit uncomfortable against Watford's attack, but wasn't necessarily terrible. But I do think a 5 is a fair reflection of his performance. So now I'm going to move on to our second central defender, and that is Mamadou Sakho, and I'm actually going to give him a 7 for his performance. Now, this obviously might come as a surprise to some people, considering we obviously conceded 2 goals, and it obviously wasn't the most solid performance defensively. But actually, Mamadou Sakho, for me, I thought he had a very decent game, and considering, as I've already mentioned, we lost basically 2 of our first team sort of back 4 partnership, you can understand it being a bit disjointed in the fact that you've only got half of your normal starting defence there. Now, to be honest, for me, for Mamadou Sakho, I thought his performance was good and does deserve that 7. And I think the word to use is a strong presence. I think that he was that presence in the defence and certainly made himself big and made it difficult for Watford to go forward. Now, I talked about with Wayne Hennessy and the fact that he was really tested, and that probably is credit to the defence. Now, most notably, it's probably mostly on Mamadou Sakho, you know, being that rock in front of Wayne Hennessy and just making sure that players like Andrew Gray, who he was obviously tasked with marking, making sure he can keep him out of the game. And, you know, when you consider how good Deeney and Gray have been this season, the fact that Sakho and Kelly kept them relatively quiet throughout the game, and it obviously meant that the creative Watford midfielders had to basically be the attacking threat because the 2 strikers were really nullified. Because of that, it obviously made it quite difficult for Watford, but ultimately they still finished the job and went on to lose the game. Now, to be honest, Mamadou Sakho, he obviously, I think, is the vice-captain now, so you can understand him being a great leader, but I still think, actually, on the pitch, and especially in defence, I think he was a real leader, just making sure everyone was where they had to be. And, you know, once again, talking about, you know, losing 2 your first team defenders, you can obviously understand actually you need someone just to marshal the defence and just make sure they know what they're doing when you consider they don't normally start. So I think in that respect, in terms of being a leader of that back four, I do think Saka done a relatively good job, and whilst doing that he still put in a good display. You know, it wasn't fantastic and it wasn't up to the standards that he would normally set, and he obviously wasn't that great in the fact that we went on to lose the game. So you could say actually defensively he weren't that great, but I do think he does deserve that 7. And I think when you consider the tough battle we had to go through in terms of the likes of Troy Deeney and Andre Gray, that's obviously quite a formidable strike force, as well as the creative midfielders from Watford. So understandably it was going to be a tough battle for him, but I think he came through it, and obviously he came out the other end. And although we did lose the game, I do think he's got to come away from the game with a bit of credit, because certainly we probably could have lost the game by more or had less control in the game if Saka hadn't been sort of as much as a presence, as commanding as he was in the game. Now, to be honest, I think at the beginning of the game, you know, the first sort of 20 minutes or so where Watford seemed to be the better team, he didn't seem to organise the team at first, and obviously that contradicts the point I made about him being a real leader. But actually, after that, after the first 20 minutes or so, we seemed to get more into the game, and he got us through it. So that just goes to show that actually, much like quite a lot of our players at the minute and last season as well, we start the game quite slowly and eventually get better, and that was the case here with Saka. And maybe that's some of the reason why people have given him, you know, 6s and 5s, but actually I do think he does deserve the 7 once again, because of that presence he had in defence, the fact that he was able to keep Gray and Deeney quiet. And obviously, even though the first 20 minutes or so he didn't do it, I do think after that 20 minutes or so, I think he was a real leader, put in good display, and obviously made sure everyone in defence knew what they had to do. But Mamadou Saka here, obviously playing in central defence, although he wasn't playing alongside his normal partners, I still think it was a relatively good shift from him, and does deserve the 7 I've given him. So we're going to move on now to our final player of the fence, and that is the left back Patrick Vanano. Now, once again, I think he didn't have the best display when you consider his high standards, but I do think a 6 is a fair reflection of his performance. Now, to be honest, we know how much of a real attacking threat and attacking presence Vanano is, so actually it was quite surprising that actually he wasn't necessarily as good as he normally has been. Now, to be honest, although he wasn't as good as he normally has been, I think the fact that Will Hughes playing out wide was playing that floating role, much like what McArthur did last season, in the fact that it was a central midfielder playing out wide. Because of that, it obviously meant that Vanano had lots and lots of space down that left hand side. Now, needless to say, he didn't necessarily exploit it as much as he should have, obviously ultimately meaning that he sort of didn't have as much attacking presence as he would have liked. But the fact that he still had that space down the left hand side, albeit not very effective, obviously just goes to show that actually he's still got that attacking threat, which is good. Now, to be honest, we all know this with Patrick Vanano, but in this game here against Watford, he constantly got forward, and you could say that actually for periods of the game he was a key player. You know, we weren't necessarily the best defensively, and we didn't create the most chances as we did against Liverpool or against Fulham, but I still think we were relatively good in attack, and certainly when you consider the game was sort of open at 0-0, you know, both teams going for it, you can understand a player like Vanano being quite crucial to that and being a key player, obviously because of his overall attacking threat. Now, to be honest, I said this in the things we learned from the game, but we really should have looked to utilise him even more. You know, we know how much of an attacking threat he is, and he showed it a little bit in this game, but when you consider all that space he had down that left hand side, because Will Hughes was playing that floating role, drifting inside, drifting out, because of that we should have exploited it more and obviously utilised Patrick Vanano even more. Now, whether that means someone like Luka just stays back and plays even more deeper, and basically we play with a back four but with Vanano sort of playing as a wing back, and sort of basically Luka playing as a very, very, very deep defensive midfielder. If we had to change up the system in order to get Vanano up the field, it would have been much better, because certainly for me, you've got an attacking presence like him, so you need to utilise it. So whether that would be a change of formation, or it's just that you say to him, you just go forward and Saka will, you know, take cover from that left hand side, whatever it is, we obviously should have been looking to utilise him even more. Now, to be honest, this was something that I've seen a few people talk about, and it's the fact that obviously PVA, we know he's one of our biggest attacking threats, but actually these days if you stop him, you stop about 70% of our attacks. Now obviously that's just a number I've taken off Twitter, I think it was, that someone's made up, but it is a very fair point in the fact that if you stop him, you stop the majority of our attacks. Now, we saw that in this game here, the fact that when Vanano doesn't have a good game or as an effective game, we obviously do struggle slightly offensively. So it just goes to show that actually if he's not on his game or he's being stopped by the opposition, we obviously don't have that much attacking impetus, let's say, going forward. And it just goes back to that point I already made, that if we utilised him, we could have had a bigger influence on the game, because ultimately I think the two defenders for Watford, the two central defenders, were doing a great job in terms of stopping Benteke and Zaha. So maybe if you get Benteke and Zaha to drag these players wide because they were marking them so closely, maybe that would have created more space for Vanana, which he could have exploited. And the same could go for Jeffrey Slupp, who I'm going to talk about later. Both of these guys playing on that left hand side, either one of them had to exploit that space, because we didn't, obviously meant we had basically a sort of lackluster performance in front of goal. Now obviously he's often at the heart of all of our openings, and obviously that just, that's something I repeat quite often, in the fact that he is basically one of the first names in the team sheet now, alongside someone like Zaha, because of obviously his defensive work and obviously his offensive contribution as well. And to be honest, I think once again here, yes, I've said he hasn't been great, but I do think the main reason I've given him a 6 is just the fact that he was one of our better players on the day. Now one of the reasons I think picked up from the game why he necessarily may not have been playing that great is just the fact that Wilf often seemed to drift a bit too far into the middle, and obviously that left a little, less opportunities for the pass, and obviously that's quite disappointing. So obviously when we play this 4-4-2, sort of there's players interchanging positions. Jeffrey Slupp sometimes goes into central midfield, and obviously Vanana sort of goes on that left wing and goes on the overlap. And obviously you've got someone like Aaron Wan-Bissaka when he plays alongside Andros Townsend. They sort of interchange positions, doing overlaps and things like that. So obviously we do play a system which can allow us to get the better and make the most of plays like Patrick Vanana. But in this game here, because Wilf often sort of drifted too far in the middle, it meant that in the final third there was no option for Vanana or Slupp, because Zaha was too far in the middle and he wasn't sort of on the left or even on the right to obviously get them 1-2s, and ultimately it affected his game, but also it affected Vanana in particular, his game as well. Now obviously because he was playing slightly further down the middle, you could say yes, that's better for us because he can win the knockdowns and he can link up with Benteke. Yes, that's great, but when you've got such firepower on that left hand side and the right hand side as well, and obviously when they're playing so tight at the back you can't get through the middle, you obviously need to realise that and obviously play slightly further wide so that you can have better chances in the game. And certainly that was quite disappointing in the fact that we didn't have that many opportunities because Zaha was too far down the middle. But it just goes to show that when Zaha was moved out or moved slightly wider in that second half, we obviously scored the goal, albeit against the run of play, you could argue. Even though that was the case, I do necessarily think that actually it just shows when Zaha plays slightly off centre, not necessarily on the wing, not necessarily as a striker, sort of in between that role, he could do these 1-2s with players and obviously go through and score. Now obviously just to finish off really, Patrick Vanana, a 6 for him. Overall, yes, he had a little bit of an attacking presence in the game because of the space that Will Hughes left. Ultimately he didn't capitalise it and utilise it as much as he should have, but I still think he had a relatively good day in defence, and in terms of the 2 goals we conceded, you can't really put any blame on him. So Vanana here, a 6 for him, another good performance. So we're now going to move on to the midfield, starting with the right midfielder Andros Townsend. Now this is another one that came up for debate. Some people thought it wasn't that great offensively in the game. Some people thought, like myself, actually he had a decent game overall, and that's why I've given him a 7 overall. Now we obviously know this, and I've talked about this last week, but he is a threat from that right hand side, cutting in on his left foot, and that's basically what he did here against Watford to cause them all sorts of problems. Quite a lot of the time, especially when he was crossing into the area, he'd cut in on his left foot, whip the ball into the area, and there were a few times where the likes of Benteke headed it down, but obviously the goalkeeper made a save. So that's the main reason I've given him a 7, is the fact that last weekend I said that he needs to cut inside more, shoot more, because he's basically gone from one end to the other. When he first joined the club he was shooting from everywhere and missing, then he just stopped shooting overall and just had nothing really end product wise offensively, and now he's sort of in the middle where he's sort of shooting in the right places but not shooting enough. So he's gone from one extreme to the other, and certainly in this game here it was a slight improvement in the fact that we saw him a lot more cutting inside on that left foot and causing Watford all kinds of problems. And hopefully in the next few games, if we can carry on getting that balance right between cutting inside and shooting and crossing, then hopefully there'll be a few more sort of attacking opportunities coming for him. Now I've said already about putting crosses into the area, but there were a number of excellent crosses into the area, which basically he done the hard work, he got the ball into the area, and obviously it was just his other teammates who basically should have converted it and let him down. So ultimately, if players like Zaha, like Benteke had finished off the chances that were basically put on the plate for them by Andros Townsend, then maybe it would have been a different game, because certainly the Benteke one, if he heads that a few inches to the right or left, that's gone in. If a few of the other chances, if other players get them in the air, get the ball down in the area and shoot, maybe it could be a different story. But once again, that's just a tale of the game as a whole. MacArthur had chances, Benteke had chances, Wilf had chances. So we've got all these players having chances but not necessarily taking them, and ultimately that's why we were punished. We weren't punished because we necessarily played terribly and we were terrible for the whole game, but we obviously got punished in the fact that we didn't take our chances that came to us in the first half. But certainly Townsend, with the amount of crosses he was putting into the area, ultimately they should have been converted, but obviously that just goes to show how good his attacking threat was, and obviously that's why I've given him a 7. Now, to be honest, in the first half, I think he was the key to all the good things Palace done in the first half, because I think, like I've said already, after that sort of first 20 minutes or so where Watford were playing really well, after that, for the remainder of the half, I thought we played really well, and certainly Townsend was one of the best attacking players from that. Now, when you consider we've got Benteke, we've got Zaha, even Jeffrey Slupp, who's obviously had a good start to the season, we've got all of these players playing up front, but they weren't as good and as effective as Townsend was, which just goes to show how good, obviously, his energy and performance levels were. But to be honest, although his first half was great, and this is probably one of the reasons people should argue or could argue why he should be given a 6 as opposed to a 7, it's just the fact that in the second half he was mostly nullified, and basically the whole team weren't as good as in the second half. But him in particular, after putting in such a good first half performance, it was obviously a little bit disappointing to see. And the final point for me really is just he was defensively a bit rash today. So we know that he's pretty good at tracking back and obviously helping out Aaron Wan-Bissaka. Obviously Aaron Wan-Bissaka wasn't playing, obviously because of his suspension, which meant Joe Ward was there. And obviously with Joe Ward being the older player, he doesn't necessarily need as much coaching throughout the game, which basically meant Townsend had that freedom to go forward. And actually, yes, it was great in the fact that he had loads of attacking chances, but actually we probably, you could argue, missed a bit of his defensive work in the fact that a few of the crosses that came into the area, in particular the cross-come shot, however you want to call it, that Watford scored from, if Townsend had just done a bit better in terms of tracking the man down and blocking that cross, maybe it would have been a different story. So although his attacking performance was good because he didn't have to coach Aaron Wan-Bissaka throughout the game, obviously that downside to that was obviously he was playing further forward and obviously was a bit rash defensively because he couldn't come back and help. Now obviously the defence, the back four and obviously the defensive midfielders should do their job and ultimately shouldn't have to need the wingers, but actually it would have been nice for Townsend just to come back like he's done in the past and just give that little bit of extra defensive cover, because certainly with the attacking threat, especially in midfield that Watford's got, it would have been nice just to have that extra man just to sort of nullify that attacking force they've got going forward. But overall, playing on that right hand side of midfield, I think Andros Townsend had a relatively good performance, and the one thing really for me that I think he deserves that 7 for is mainly for his crossing. But do comment below with your thoughts, whether you would have given him a 6 or a 7. But overall, I do think a 7 is a fair result, considering, especially in the first half, how good he was as an attacking threat. So we're now going to move on to the centre of midfield, and obviously starting with the captain, Luka Milivojevic. Now he's someone who actually, if you look on Twitter, quite a lot of people are criticising him for his performance, and rightly so, because obviously we know how good he was last season. He was absolutely a class act, and actually the beginning of this season, the 3 games we've played so far, he's been sort of quite lacklustre, hasn't been quite good, and ultimately you could say this game in particular could have been one of his worst in a Palace shirt. But just to go over the reasons I've given him a 6 is just the fact that I think he's still a class act. Whenever he plays bad, he still does a bit right, and he isn't necessarily totally sort of lackadaisical, let's use that word. So overall, even though he wasn't necessarily great in this game, I still thought there were bits about him which shows he's a class act. Now obviously in this game, I've said already about the threat that Watford had. Because of that, Luka, like he always does, sat very deep, obviously against Watford, and quite a few times he picked up the ball from deep and tried to get forward by linking up people like Benteke and threading passes forward. But ultimately, not really anything came from it, and that just goes to show that actually, yes, Luka was trying to get things started, but overall as a team we weren't quite up to it, and obviously things like that pass weren't necessarily getting to Benteke, or Benteke weren't quite flicking on to the right area. So ultimately we were trying to do the right things and looking to get things done, but ultimately it didn't quite work out. But that's just to say Luka, maybe he's having a few off games, and every player does have them occasionally. But obviously it is quite disappointing considering how good he was last season, and you could argue, like I've said already, this could be one of his worst performances in a Palace shirt, but you also could argue actually he's not necessarily as effective as he was last season. Now, to be honest, I'm taking this from Twitter now and the BBS, things like this, what people have been saying, but it just looks like he isn't the Luka that finished last season. Now, whether that's because he was at the World Cup, so he's still a bit fatigued from that in terms of playing club football and then going to play for his country and, playing that long time, and maybe because he's still not fully fit because he's had less pre-season, so maybe give it 1 or 2 more weeks and he may be up to standard, or whether it's just because he's just going through a bad spell of form. Whatever it is, he seems to not be up to that standard where he finished last season. Now, to be honest, obviously Capoue, he should have been sent off. I think we've already sort of discussed that already, but the goal he assisted, ultimately he shouldn't have been on the pitch anyway, but that challenge that Luka put onto him was absolutely woeful, and obviously that's what let us adrift. If Luka just stuck his leg in there, just took down the man, take the yellow card for the team, then ultimately he wouldn't have gone on the counter-attack and score for Watford. Now, obviously I've said this already, he shouldn't have been on the pitch anyway, but you've just got to go with the game of football. You can't just sort of dwell on that for the whole game. And obviously what you've got to do there, loads of players like MacArthur, like Milivojevic, like even Townsend as well, they just shrugged him off, didn't try and get the ball off of him, which obviously was quite disappointing. It would have been nice for Luka to put in that challenge, and if he can't make that challenge and he doesn't want to get booked, then just stay with your man. Just sort of don't try and barge him off the ball or whatever. Just stay with him, just run beside him, try and block the opportunities he could have passing wise, and obviously try your best to stop the attack. And obviously it was quite woeful in the fact that he tried to sort of get in for a tackle, tried to shoulder barge him, and then sort of just pulled out and just let him run past him. Now, Luka last season, who wouldn't have got past him, he would have tackled him, got the ball off, and we probably would have started a counter-attack by getting the ball away. But this one was just terrible, really, and it just really epitomises sort of the decline, let's say, in terms of last season to the beginning of this season here. But, like I've said already, I'd rather him take a card for the team, just take him down, and, we just sort of defend the set piece, as opposed to just letting him run through on goal, and obviously set up the guy for the goal. But like I've said already, it's not rocket science. You either take one for the team, or you just stay with your man and make sure he can't make that pass, which ultimately gets the ball into the box. Now, to be honest, the main reason I've given him a 6 as opposed to a 5, which I think many people would have given him, is the fact that he wasn't terrible, but he's just missing that little bit extra that made him so dominant last year. So I'm giving him the 6 because it's sort of the benefit of the doubt, but also I don't think he was absolutely terrible and at fault for everything, because there were still some good parts of his game in terms of sitting deep and protecting that back four, but there were also terrible parts of his game as well. So you've got to look at both sides of the stories and actually go, was he as bad or as uninfluential as someone like Joe Ward, or was he slightly better? And because I've gave Joe Ward a 5, I think Luka wasn't necessarily as bad as average as them guys, but I do still think he wasn't necessarily that great. So I do think a 6 is a fair reflection of his game. But once again, as the captain, I think he could have done a little bit more talking. So especially when Zaha got taken down for that what should have been a red card challenge, Luka should have been there straight away and keep nagging the ref for the whole game and saying, why have you not given this? And every single tackle Watford make, you should have been challenging that and saying, well, no, if you're going to book someone like Wilf after he's obviously been tackled to the ground, if you're going to book him for something where he wins the ball, Luka's got to, as the captain, just keep going on at the ref to obviously, get the other players booked. Because ultimately, that was Watford's tactic, try and wind up the Palace players, get them sent off, and obviously that's their achievement, reach. So we should have sort of countered that and just try and play them at their own game, basically. Ultimately, we didn't, and ultimately he sort of gave the ball away for that goal, didn't make that challenge. So overall, fairly disappointing performance from him. Hopefully, like I've said already, when he has sort of the equivalent of pre-season what the other players have had, probably he'll be back up to standard and better performances for him coming soon. Now, to move on now to his centre midfield partner, and that is obviously James MacArthur. Now, he is one of these ones, once again, who's up for debate. Some people thought he wasn't that great. Yes, he was probably one of our better players, but wasn't great. And people like me actually think, even though the overall team performance was quite lacklustre, I thought he was really good. And that's why I'm going to give him an 8 overall, which is quite surprising given the scoreline and the performance. But I'll go on to explain why. Now, to be honest, in this game here, obviously against Liverpool, MacArthur had to play slightly more deeper because of the threat they had, and that was understandable. But here against Watford, a slightly lesser opposition, not quite as hard as Liverpool, but not necessarily easy. And obviously because of that, he played slightly further forward in that sort of box-to-box midfield role. And actually, I do think, even though we didn't necessarily win the midfield battle for the whole game, I do think he dictated the play from that middle of the park, and certainly was quite influential for quite a lot of the work Palace were doing in the midfield. Now, to be honest, he did really, really well to get into the box for that Townsend pass in the first half, and probably could have got the opener if it wasn't for the save. But that once again just goes to show, and I said this in the things we learned, if you don't take your chances, you're going to get punished for it. And ultimately, that's what we did, because we could have been 2-0 up at half time with our chances if we had taken them, or if the keeper hadn't made a save. But ultimately, football doesn't work like that, and we went on to lose the game. But like I've said already, I talked about Townsend being really good offensively, getting balls into the box and just creating chances, not only for himself but for his teammates. And that one for James McArthur was a classic example where he got the ball into the box, a great opportunity, and obviously, like I said with Townsend, he didn't get rewarded because no players finished it off. And this was just another example where you got into a good position but no one was there to finish off. Now obviously, a few moments later, after McArthur missed that shot, he made a crucial tackle at the other end to obviously stop a Watford attack and get the ball out for a corner. So it just goes to show that actually, even though he missed that chance, he still made up for it at the other end by stopping another goal scoring opportunity. So that, once again, that's what you want to see from players. You've got people like Luca who missed that challenge, but you didn't see him after that with that sort of drive and determination to get something back and try and give back for that little mistake. Get to him and went up the other end and made that challenge there. But obviously, that challenge, if you put that aside, he made a number of crucial interceptions throughout the whole game. He was outstanding all round, defensively and offensively. And like I've said already, it wasn't just that one challenge he made several crucial interceptions throughout the game, which just goes to show that actually how important he is playing that box-to-box midfielder role. Now, to be honest, much like I said with Andros Townsend in the fact that he was good in the first half, exactly the same here with McArthur, where he was much more effective in that first half. I think the word to use is excellent. I can't really fault him for anything in that first half other than missing that shot. And of course, he came close to scoring that opener, and it was at a key time, so you can understand me saying that his performance overall was good. And if he did score that goal, you maybe could have given him a 9 if the game had panned out, and if he had played as well as he did in the first half for the rest of the game. You could be looking at an 8 performance, because I think, like I've said already, in that box-to-box midfield role, he did look quite impressive. But like I've said already, because we went to lose the game and obviously he missed that chance and he weren't necessarily that great alongside Luca, you probably could argue I should give him a 7, but I'm going to give him an 8 purely because of how good he was in that role in the field. And like I've said already, yes, he missed that chance, which obviously it's not great when you miss any chance, but because it was at such a key moment and could have ultimately helped us to win the game, that's the thing that's really quite disappointing. Now, to be honest, like I've said already, I've given him an 8 because it's really difficult to fault him on his touches in the middle of the field, because once again, great performance there. But that sort of middle two isn't quite working. Now, obviously, McArthur last season, he did play alongside Luca for certain parts of it, but for the majority, he was playing sort of on that left-hand side as a left midfielder, or even on the right-hand side as sort of a wide midfielder who tucked inside. Now, that sort of worked for me quite fine, because when we were attacking, it could turn to a midfield three of Luca, Cabaye and McArthur. But obviously, with Cabaye going, Luca's obviously been left on his own, and McArthur's come to sort of fill that role that Cabaye's left. And although he does an alright job there, I don't necessarily think he's a like-for-like player, and we seem to be seeing that in the game. Now, personally for me, I would like to see someone like Max Meyer come in, maybe for Jeffrey Stupp, and maybe we could play Max Meyer in Cabaye's place, where McArthur's playing, and push McArthur back out wide, where he played so well last season. Whatever it is, I think we just need to move the team around, because at the moment, I think as good as McArthur and Luca are together, I don't think it's as great as a partnership we could have, because I think they do work, but not as good as, say, how effective the Cabaye was alongside Luca last season. So I think for me, you bring Max Meyer in because he looked good when he came on. I think it was on Sunday the game was. So you play Max Meyer quite deep, you push McArthur, and in that way you've got two central defenders two central defensive midfielders with someone like McArthur who can tuck inside, with Andros Townsend as well on the other side. So that would just give us a little bit more balance to the side, and I do think it could work slightly better. But like I've said already, not necessarily the best performance, and doesn't seem to be having as good a partnership with Luca as Cabaye did last season, but still, nevertheless, a good performance for him, and certainly does deserve the 8. Now, much like I said with Luca, in the fact that Luca should have made that challenge on Capu, obviously to stop him assisting the goal. Same could be said for McArthur, and that's one of the only real downsides for me, in the fact that he didn't just take out Capu, take that yellow card and just take it for the team, rather than making a challenge. Obviously they're trying to sort of zone and mark him, but ultimately that's too late because he's got the ball, and because we haven't blocked his passing opportunities, he's basically just sprayed it out wide for the goal. So not only was Luca at fault for that, but you could say MacArthur as well should have made a challenge there. But overall, playing in central midfield, I think MacArthur had a very good game and fully deserves the 8. Once again, playing in that box-to-box midfield role, I think he dictated play and certainly dominated the midfield and the middle of the park for quite a lot of the game. Was unlucky not to obviously get the opener with that fantastic cross into the box by Townsend, obviously a good save by the goalkeeper. But overall, I think the fact that he made loads of crucial interceptions throughout the game and was overall just sort of his overall all-round play was very good. I do think he does deserve that 8. But do comment below with your thoughts and whether you do agree with my opinion that actually Max Meyer should come in and play alongside Luca and we should put MacArthur back out. Now to move on to the final player in our midfield, and that is the left midfielder Jeffrey Slupp. Now to be honest, this was another player who necessarily didn't have a great game, didn't have a good game, so overall I'm going to give him a 6 for his performance. Now to be honest, I think the word to use to describe his performance would be decent. I think that down that left hand side, because like I said with Vanana, because Will Hughes is playing sort of a role in the side where he was drifting in the middle, out wide, because of that, that left quite a lot of space down that left flank. And certainly Jeffrey Slupp had quite a lot of joy in terms of skipping past him and having sort of space to get down the left hand side, which was great. But obviously it's alright having all the space in the world and being able to, you know, use the space on the field, but if you can't have that final ball and if you're lacking that, there's obviously no real point having it. And that was exactly the case here with Jeffrey Slupp, in the fact that he put in a decent display, in the fact that he was utilising the space, but when it came to that final ball, when it came to finishing a chance or putting a cross into the area, he didn't quite have that, and that's probably what limited him to a 6 overall in his performance. To be honest, I think, you know, this was another player who came up for debate. People were saying he was useless, didn't really do much. I think for me, I thought he did well. He done well enough to obviously just put a shift in for the side, and to be honest, he was quite unlucky to come off, to be honest. Towards the end of the game, I think he got substituted, but I think because we needed to change things up and we needed to bring on a bit more attacking threat and some more creativity, I think Max Meyer is exactly that. So I think it was a fair substitution, but you could say he was a bit unlucky to do so, because although he wasn't necessarily great in the fact that he was putting balls into the box and had that final ball and had that end product, even though he didn't have that, he was still doing all of the right things in terms of finding that space and getting in behind, but obviously he wasn't making the most of it. So you could say, I think 6 fairly reflects his performance overall, and you could argue once again that he was unlucky to come off, but I do think when he did come off, we did become better in the game because of that more creativity that obviously Max Meyer brought into the side. Now obviously I think he's very much a very, very good team player in the fact that he plays to instructions, he does what you want him to, whether that be playing at left back, playing left midfield, even playing at striker as he's done before. So it obviously shows that he's a good team player, he's very versatile, can play anywhere, but obviously he plays, you know, tightly to the instructions, and his instructions were quite clear for me to see in the fact that you get down that left hand side, use the space and try and get the ball into the area. So he's done most of that correct in the fact that he was making space down that left hand side. But obviously, once again, goes back to that point, he was lacking that final ball. So really, you could say, actually, you've done all of the right things other than the thing that is the most important in terms of creating goal-scoring opportunities. But overall, I think Jeffrey Slupp, I do think a 6 is a fair result. This is certainly one that could be up for debate, and many people may disagree with me. But once again, like I've said, I did think he put in a decent display, did well enough for the team. And I think that considering Will Hughes left all that space down the left-hand side, I do think Jeffrey Slupp done very good to utilise it, but obviously he was just lacking that final ball when having that opportunity. And certainly that links back to the point I made about changing the formation. I do think based on this performance where he was good, but wasn't quite good enough and wasn't creating enough, I do think in the next game someone like Jeffrey Slupp will be dropped and someone like Max Meyer or even Cheku Kouyaté might come into the side just to shore up the midfield, and someone like MacArthur would move slightly wide. But Jeffrey Slupp here playing on the left hand side of the midfield, a good performance from him and a fully deserved 6. So now we're going to move on to the first of our 2 strikers, and that is Christian Benteke. Now actually this was another one that came up for quite a lot of debate, and quite a lot of the people were being very, very critical on Twitter. Now personally for me, reviewing players, I've got to look at both sides of the story, and actually I don't think he was as bad. He wasn't great, but he wasn't as bad as some people are making it out to be. So I'm going to give him a 6 for his overall game. I think actually in attack, even though he didn't score or didn't assist any goals, I do think he was good in attack. Not very good, not excellent, which people are making out that he should be that every game. Sometimes players have off games or off seasons, certainly Benteke is trying to regain that confidence. But I think in terms of his attacking play, which was good, I think his hold-up play was very good in terms of, you know, chesting the ball down, linking up with other players, and just obviously holding up the ball, waiting for other players to get around him to sort of do 1-2s. That was obviously very great. He obviously linked up excellently with Zaha, Townsend and Slop. So once again goes back to that point that he holds up the ball, then can link up with other players around him. So the fact that he can do that is obviously very impressive. And obviously if you are able to link up with players, yes, ultimately it's all about, you know, that 1-2s and stuff, but also it could just be about, you know, waiting for other players and reinforcements to come into the box so that you can pass the ball to them or do 1-2s with all these other players as well. So that's what people don't see with Benteke. They just expect him to score goals, and if he doesn't score a goal, he's had a terrible game. Whereas actually, I think in this game, his hold-up play was very good, and considering the physicality that Watford have in their back line, it's obviously quite understandable it's going to be a difficult task, but he seemed to do alright there. Not excellently, once again, but alright there. And obviously, once again, like I've said, linking up with Townsend, Zaha and Slop. Obviously, Slop less so, but certainly Townsend and Zaha, I do think he was very good at holding up the ball and bringing these guys back into play. Now obviously one of the main reasons people are criticising him, and probably probably the biggest reason why people or most people are going to disagree with me giving him 6, is obviously they should have done better with an early header, which was well saved by the keeper. Now obviously I've talked about Townsend and the fact that he put in loads of crosses into the box, and obviously one of them fell to Benteke. He's absolutely hammered the header, it's going to go in, and obviously the keeper's made a good save. Now some people would say that he should be looking to put that in the far corner away from the goalkeeper, but ultimately when you've got a ball travelling at speed, you haven't always got all that time to think, so your first thing is just to head it down at goal, which he did, lots of power on it, which he did, and it was going to go in, but the goalkeeper made a save. So whilst I understand people criticising him, saying he should be doing better in terms of the placement of the header, if you look at the game, with the fast pace of it, ultimately he hasn't really got enough time to think about heading it into the corner, so he'd actually just make sure he gets his head on it, lots of power, which he did, and ultimately it was saved by the goalkeeper. Now to be honest, I think his first half was good. Once again, a player who was good in one half, not so good in the other. I think he was very good in the first half, and obviously unlucky not to score with that header. But much like a few players in this game here against Watford, I think he disappeared somewhat in the second half. Although, you know, there was one chance where he turned, had a shot, and obviously that was went just wide. So once again, people are criticising him for missing these chances, but last season he didn't even get these chances. You know, his touch was too heavy and it got intercepted or things like this. So the fact that he's now getting better slowly, and the fact that he's now winning the headers again in the box, and he's obviously got that confidence to have a turn inside the box and shoot, that's obviously quite impressive, and it shows that he's improving. Now what he's got to do is just finish off one of these chances and sort of just get that confidence back from scoring the goal. Now to be honest, it is there's sort of an enigma, let's say, around him at the minute, but we need him to sort of unravel it, and quickly, because at the moment it seems that by every game that goes by he doesn't score, doesn't get an assist, lots more criticism is being put on him, and obviously it just seems to be worsening his performances. So we just need him just to get a goal or just get an assist, get something in the game, win a penalty even, and just so we can sort of get rid of that enigma and he can go back to how he was before. But like I said already, this is a player who's going to come up for a lot of debate, and I talked about it quite a lot in depth last season. But once again, I personally think, looking at his performance, not necessarily the fact that the goals and assists, but looking at the actual performance of the player, I do think it was relatively good and does deserve the 6. Like I've said already, he was good in attack, you know, with his hold-up play and obviously his link-up play as well, and that's quite important, because there's no point just having a target man up top and you just rely on him. You've got to have him who can link up other players and get others involved. And the fact that he does that excellently is great as well, because although he may not be getting all the goals and all of the assists, but the fact that he's given the opportunities to other players, obviously you've got to give him some credit for that, because he's allowing other players to get involved. But like I've said already, a game of 2 halves from him. Not very good in the second half, but in the first half he was very good. I do think he does deserve the 6 I've given him. But like I've said already, and I say this with quite a lot of players, do comment below with your opinions, because this is a player who's going to come up with a lot of debate. Now moving on to our final player, and obviously that is the striker Wilfried Zaha. Much like Benteke, didn't really have the best game, but I do think he was relatively good offensively, so I'm going to give him a 6 overall for his performance. To be honest, we talked about this last season quite a lot, in the fact that Watford, they absolutely hate Wilfried Zaha, so they were booing him throughout the whole game, and it was no different here, you know, on a Sunday afternoon. But even though he had all of this criticism, all of these people booing him, he still had a relatively good game, you know. Obviously, Capu, I talked about his red card challenge already, you know. Literally 2-footed Zaha on the Achilles. I don't understand people trying to say that you know, that Zaha died, there was a little bit of contact there. If you snap or step on someone's Achilles, that could be a career-ending injury. So the people saying that, you know, that was a Zaha dive, it's absolutely ludicrous that people are saying that, and it's also absolutely ludicrous that the referee saw it. You know, you see in the stands people are saying, well, it's 50-50, we don't know, yellow card we thought was fair at the time. But when you see the replays, obviously we've got the ability to see it from all different angles. You can say, actually, yes, you can understand why people in the stands would think that's not a red card, but when you see it from the camera angle of the referee, it's just unbelievable how he hasn't given that as a red card. Because you see Capoue, the ball had already gone, there was no way he was going to get the card, and he was intentionally going there to hurt Zaha, you know, two-footed him in the Achilles. And like I've said already, that could have been a career-ending injury, which not only would have been bad for him, Zaha, but it also would have been absolutely catastrophic for Palace going forth this season. But like I said already, it should have been a red card, and like I said already, you know, I keep saying that quite a lot, but I do repeat myself quite a lot because I want to make these points clear. But you know, like I said already, I keep saying that again continuously. But yeah, I do think it should have been a red card, and I think the fact that he assisted a goal was sort of just a stab in the wounds. Because if he had been sent off the pitch, as he rightly should have done, and all the pundits have said it should have been a red card, if he had done that, it probably would have been a different story altogether. But to be honest, obviously he had that tackle, and obviously that seemed to sort of hinder his performance. He weren't as good after that, understandably, because he could have sort of got a little niggly injury. But to be honest, if you put that aside, I think he was effectively marked out of the game anyway. So Watford, they know how much of an attacker he is, so of course their main target or their main aim was just to try and injure him, just try and annoy him so that he wouldn't play as well. But then obviously the secondary thing, which most players do anyway, is just basically marking. There's no need to destroy and just sort of disrupt a player. You know, if you're a good enough team or you're good enough defenders, you would just mark him out of the game anyway. And eventually Watford, because the booing and stuff only seemed to affect Zaha a little bit, they obviously just basically resulted back to just doing normal solid defending, and obviously they kept him relatively quiet throughout the game. Now to be honest, his goal obviously scored, obviously didn't help us to win the game, but certainly at 2-1 it's great to see that he's now scored, I think it's 7 goals in 9 games, and obviously this season it's 2 goals in 3 games. So although he hasn't been playing great this season, he's still got quite a good goal scoring record. Obviously he took his goal really well, a nice 1-2 with Max Meyer coming off the bench, and obviously it just goes to show Max Meyer the quality he's got, the fact that he came off the bench, ultimately had that link-up play with Zaha, and he looked quite impressive. You know, if you look back at the goal, you know, Zaha on the edge of the area, gets past 2 defenders, puts the ball to Meyer. Meyer then gives him, or yeah, basically supplies the ball back to him. Zaha runs into the box, and at a very, very tight angle, I think it was right footed, just strikes it under the goalkeeper. He was quite lucky to find that little gap, but the fact that he scored from that tight angle was quite impressive. Now, to be honest, I think there was another chance where Benteke was screaming for a gap in the air, but he scored as well. So I think at that chance, I think Benteke was waiting inside the box, thinking that Zaha was going to cross it into the box, and I think that's right. Or maybe he wasn't even on the pitch at that point, but I'm sure, because I've seen a few people make this comment, but I'm sure Benteke was sort of screaming for that ball. But ultimately Zaha, he's got that confidence to take on defenders and score it himself. But like I've said already, that was a very good goal. Not only the build-up in terms of the assist from Meyer, but the fact that he got it on from that tight angle. Now obviously it's great scoring goals, but this goal in particular is obviously has quite a lot of significance. In the fact that Zaha, by scoring that goal, he's got 24 Premier League goals for Palace now, which makes him our top Premier League goal scorer throughout the history of the club, which is obviously quite impressive. I think Chris Armstrong, obviously we've only been in the Premier League for 6 years, so Chris Armstrong's record from, I think it was the 90s, was it, or maybe the 2000s, I can't remember exactly when it was, but his record stood for quite a few years, basically because we haven't necessarily had that out and out goal scorer for Palace. His was 23 goals for quite a long time. He held that record, but it's nice to see now Zaha finally got that recognition he deserves in the fact that he's now got one of Palace's records. And like I said already, you know, the first few seasons of Zaha when he came back from United, he weren't necessarily that great, 1 or 2 goals a season, but the last 3 seasons or so, I think he got 9 goals one season, 7 this season, and he's already on 2 this season. So certainly he's on the right track to completely surpass that record. And certainly, considering there's not many other players other than Benteke who's in the current squad who are anywhere near that record, certainly the sky's the limit now for Zaha. And I think, considering he's quite happy playing for Palace, I'm sure he'll go forth and just try his best to just basically make sure that not many people can catch up with that record. And I'm 90% sure that he probably can, get to maybe 30, maybe even 40 Premier League goals for Palace if he can stay here over the next few seasons, because it would be great to see. And if he carries on at the rate at the moment that he's scoring goals, he certainly will be able to do that and make it quite hard and difficult for other players to go forth and catch his record. But Wilfried Zaha here, I've given him a 6. He hasn't been as effective as he has been in other games, but it just goes to show his quality in the fact that he may not have had the best game ever and he may not have had the most influence, but the fact that he can still pop up with a goal just really goes to show the quality he has on the ball. Because I talked about this last season, but if you've got a player who's had a quiet game but they're so good that they can still pop up with a goal, that just really goes, for me in particular, just goes to highlight the quality he does have. But Wilfried Zaha here, I do think a 6 is a fair result, but do feel free to comment below with your general opinions on his performance. So I'm just going to move on now to the substitutes. Obviously Max Meyer and Alexander Sorloth. Obviously Alexander Sorloth, not really too much to say about him, so I'm not really going to give him a rating. Came on quite late for Christian Benteke. Didn't really basically failed to make an impact, but that's because he was hardly on the pitch long enough. But I personally think, looking back at the game, he won every header, and that's obviously great. You come on for Benteke and you win all your headers, so basically sort of a like-for-like replacement for Benteke. But I still would have expected a little bit better for him, and I personally look at the game thinking, actually maybe Jordan Ayew should have come on, because I think he would have had a little bit more impact, only because he was a different option, and because Benteke wasn't working in the game, I think that Ayew being that different option may have been better for us. Now, before Sorloth came on, obviously Max Meyer came on for Jeffrey Slupp. I'm going to give him a 7 because I think he was actually relatively good in the game. Obviously got his first assist for the club and certainly made an impact coming off of the bench. Now, to be honest, not long after coming on, he obviously got booked, but like I've said already, sometimes you've got to take one for the team. He done exactly that, and obviously he went on to Twitter, or I think, no, it was on Instagram after the game, post a picture of him with his hands out, after he was given that yellow card, which basically just goes to show that actually he was quite happy to take one for the team, and obviously that just shows what a character he is. And certainly I am looking forward a lot to obviously watching him going forth this season. Now, I am recording this on the Tuesday where we're going to play Swansea, obviously in the Carabao Cup. It's looking likely that Max Meyer is going to start that game, so hopefully he can make a real impact in that game against Swansea, and hopefully that will sort of give him the chance to start on Saturday against Southampton, because I certainly think, based on that little cameo appearance he gave against Watford, and the fact that he's probably going to be given the chance to show and just present himself in the League Cup, I think it would be it'd be really great to see what he can do. But to be honest, he looks very sharp, which is obviously quite good from a new signing. Obviously he's had a late pre-season in the fact that he's been looking for a club, but he now looks sharp. He looks like he can make an impact, but I just think he maybe needs just a few more games. So I think this Swansea game is really good for him, because it will give him his chance to play against some quality opposition, because you've got to remember Swansea still have some good players in their squad, so just give him that chance to play against these players, and hopefully that will build up his confidence and his fitness so he can have more impact when he plays in the Premier League. But as I've said already, I do think a 7 overall is a fair result. Got his first assist, which is great, shows that he's got great link-up play with Zaha, and also shows the creativity he's got. And to be honest, when we signed him, people were like, well, he hasn't scored or assisted last season. Actually, if you look at his defensive stats where he was playing, he was absolutely outstanding in that position. So it's not just about goals and assists sometimes with players. It's obviously about sort of their contribution to the side. But the fact that he's able to start his Palace career in his second game for us and get an assist, that's obviously quite impressive as well. And as I've already mentioned, it would be nice to see him play down the middle, move McArthur out wide, bring Jeffrey Slupp on the bench, onto the bench, because I think that sort of system could work really well with Meyer and Luca's defensive sort of attributes, and of course McArthur's attacking attributes. I think that could be a really, really good partnership going forward. But I do understand why Roy didn't start Meyer against Watford, because of how physical and how the quality they've got in midfield. But I certainly do think, given that chance against Swansea, getting up his fitness, and the fact that I think personally he should be starting against Southampton, I do really think we could see him there. To be honest, that was the substitutes. Obviously Max Meyer coming on for Jeffrey Slupp and Alexander Sorloth coming on for Christian Benteke. Just to sort of go over the game and just give you a few points I picked up from the game. So to be honest, it was a game that we did enough to get at least a point from, but ultimately, as is the thing in football, sometimes you deserve to get something from the game, albeit a point. but obviously we end up eventually just coming home with nothing. But to be honest, I think before the game, no one would have been disappointed if we got a draw. I personally would have been absolutely ecstatic if we had scored in the last minute and made it 2-2, because I think that would have been a fair reflection of the game. But ultimately, you can't always win everything. And to be honest, when you consider the goal that won the game, so the goal to make it 2-0, it was a fluky cross caught in the wind, and eventually it caught everyone out, and it obviously sailed into the top corner. So there's not much you can do about that. The first goal, yes, I said Luca should have probably done better, and MacArthur as well. But the goal that actually won the game to make it 2-0, you know, that was a bit fluky. And although we came back into the game, obviously it's still disappointing to lose a game with a fluky goal like that. Now, defensively, for the most part, I think we coped, because although half of our backline, like I've said already, they went out because obviously Tompkins was injured and Wan-Bissaka was suspended. Although we lost half of them, I still think we coped defensively for the most part. But still, the worst thing is Tompkins getting injured, because I think it certainly would have been a different result if Tompkins hadn't have got injured, because I'm sure quite a few of these chances that Watford got on the edge of the area, Tompkins would have absolutely cleared them. And certainly with the fluke goal, he probably would have got the organisation a bit better in the box, so that players would be able to clear it off the line, or Hennessy would be in the right position. So certainly that was quite disappointing. And obviously on Aaron Wan-Bissaka missing the game, it was obviously great to see him in the away end, which just goes to show how much of a Palace icon he is already. You know, he's only played 9 games for Palace, but the fact that he's in the away end with all of the fans, it just really goes to show how much of a fan favourite he already is. And obviously it's obviously great to see players in the away end, obviously, even though we lost the game. It's obviously quite nice to see as well. Now, to be honest, the most worrying thing is that for long spells we sort of just look to be ticking over. So rather than trying to change something and just get back into the game, we sort of just let the game tick over. And that's one criticism I have of Roy Hodgson. You know, we could see on 60 minutes, once that second goal went in, we needed to change something, but Roy waited right until the end of the game, 80th minute, to make a substitute. So rather than just ticking over, what we need to do is actually, as soon as a goal goes in, or as soon as we realise quite clearly that something needs to change, rather than just sort of waiting it out and seeing if it could change, just change it. Try and make a dramatic change, and try and just at least get something from the game. Ultimately, we left it too late, because I think if the game had gone on a few more minutes, we might have been able to get something from it. But ultimately, like I've said already, Roy Hodgson leaves it late. And that's, once again, a theme of late substitutions or no substitutions, was something I talked about quite a lot last season. But obviously the positive thing to say from that is that although we just kept ticking over, the fact that we were still able to make loads of chances to win the game comfortably, but the fact that we didn't take them is the problem. So, like I've said already, positives to take from the game is the fact that we were creating loads of chances, and we've got enough chances to win the game comfortably, quite comfortably. We could have been 2-0 up at half time, but the fact that we didn't take them, and the fact that we still just let the game tick over, obviously that is the problem. Now, to be honest, just to finish off, I just want to say that I was actually quite surprised to see Ayew or Kouyaté not start. I think certainly Kouyaté could have come into them in the midfield instead of Jeffrey Slupp and push MacArthur out wide, just to give us a little bit more defensive solidity. And obviously it would have been nice to see Ayew come off the bench, because while Sorloth is a relatively good player, he's a like-for-like swap for Benteke, so it would have been nice just to see Ayew come on, because he gives us that little bit of a different option. But like I've said, the players who came on, Max Meyer, he looks very sharp, and it's obviously great for him to get his first assist, but he just needs to be on longer than 10 minutes or so, because the fact that he made so much impact in that 10 minutes on the field just goes to show. And just imagine what would happen if he would given maybe even 60 minutes, even if he doesn't play the whole game, just give him 60 minutes, because I'm sure if he can do what he done in them 10 minutes in 60 minutes and more, obviously it will just go to show that how much of a good player he is. But just to finish off, you know, there's lots more to do, I think, you know, in terms of Roy Hodgson, just sort of changing up the system a little bit, getting the new players in. But I'm just gonna, the final point really for me, the final point is that obviously we've got to rethink everything, but we've just got to hope that James Tompkins is a precaution, because he's such a key player for us, and he just showed in this game that when he wasn't playing, it sort of impacted our play. So the point I want to really finish the player ratings part on is just the fact that we've got to pray and hope that James Tompkins' injury isn't too serious, once again, because of how crucial he is to our side. So I'm now going to move on to the Man of the Match award. But before I do that and give you my Man of the Match and who I thought had a big influence in the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. Now obviously, as you've already heard in the player ratings, it was sort of a lacklustre performance for the majority of the game from Palace, so actually it's quite hard to pick out certain players considering it was quite a disappointing loss in the end. But I've obviously come up with a short list of 4, and I do think out of what was overall quite a lacklustre performance, as I've already said, I do think that these players did stand out for me and done slightly better than, say, some of the other players on the field. So these 4 players are Wayne Hennessy, Mamadou Sakho, Andros Townsend and James McArthur. Now the main reason I've put Hennessy in here is just because he made he made a number of good saves in the game, some of them routine, some of them better, and although he was rarely tested, the fact that he popped up at certain points to keep the game, or basically stop us from conceding any more goals at the points in the game where we were already behind or we weren't necessarily having much domination of the game, he was obviously able to keep us in the game up. Obviously we didn't get anything from the game, but the fact that he kept us in the game up till them points was obviously good to see, and obviously that's what you would expect from a goalkeeper. And yes, some people may blame him on the goal and the fact that he didn't jump high enough, or he didn't get down low enough. Not really too much blame on the goal because the box was so crowded. So actually, aside from the 2 goals we conceded and the fact that he made loads of saves, he deserves to be on the shortlist. Mamadou Sakho, wasn't necessarily the best defensive performance overall, but I do think Sakho was probably, I suppose the way to describe it is just a really strong presence in defence. I think Andre Gray has caused loads of teams problems in the 3 games he's played this season, and I think Mamadou Sakho, out of Kelly and Sakho at the back, Sakho done a greater deal in terms of dealing with him, and I think he done a much better job. And to be honest, it was sort of a good display all round. He looked like a real leader on the pitch, basically, just sort of making sure the defence know what to do. Yes, ultimately we weren't the best defensively in the game, but the fact that he was still being that leader from the back and overall just put himself put in a good display, that's why he's on the shortlist. Andros Townsend, much like I said last week, he was probably one of our bigger attacking threats. Down that right hand side, he was a threat throughout the whole game. Quite often, I said last week that he needs to shoot more. Obviously in this game, quite a lot of the time he was cutting in from his left foot, causing all kinds of problems. And although he didn't shoot that much in this game, there were quite a few times where he put balls into the box and we were quite unlucky. In particular, one where Benteke headed and Forster made the save. So, you could look at that. I think it's Forster his name, but correct me if I'm wrong. But the fact that Townsend's putting in these crosses into the box and was still an attacking threat is a reason why I've put him on the shortlist. And like I've said, he put in some excellent crosses, numerous excellent crosses into the box, but they basically should have been converted. So he's done all the good work, and obviously his teammates weren't able to finish the chance off. Moving on to our final player, James McArthur. I think he basically played the epitome of a box-to-box midfielder in this game. I think in terms of that midfield battle, I thought he dictated the game from that middle of the park. And I think in the first half in particular, there was a chance once again, Andros Townsend creating chances. McArthur was quite unlucky to obviously not score from that good save down, and that probably would have been the opener 1-0. And then a few minutes later, obviously making up for that, make a lovely sliding challenge to get the ball, block the ball out for a corner. So not only was he offensively, doing that box-to-box midfielder role great, but actually he made up for missing that chance by actually going down the other end and obviously blocking a chance for Watford. So obviously that determination and grit, not only offensively but to get back and do your defensive work, was also great as well. And the main thing for me that I put him on the shortlist is that overall it was quite a disappointing midfield performance from the whole team, but I still think he made quite a number of crucial interceptions, throughout the whole game. And overall, I would say out of all of our players, he was probably one of the most outstanding in terms of the all-round display, the fact that he was consistent throughout the whole game. But overall, I do think these 4 players do deserve recognition, because although the overall team performance wasn't great, I think these guys done their bit for the team. Hennessy making these saves to keep us in the game at certain points. Obviously Mamadou Sakho just putting in an overall strong defensive performance where he had a good presence at the back, and although we conceded 2 goals, not really too much blames on him. Obviously Andros Townsend for that threat down that left hand side or the right hand side, wherever he was playing throughout the duration of the game, and of course his threat from cutting inside and put crosses into the area, and of course James McArthur just for his overall outstanding play, including the interceptions and obviously the chances on goal. Now for me, I think it's quite an easy decision. You obviously heard the player ratings and you've heard the ratings I've given players, but I am going to give it to James McArthur. So congratulations, James. You don't get a trophy or certificate, but you do get my sincere congratulations on what was another solid performance from you. But the main reason I've given it to him as opposed to these other players is just because he just basically stood out for me more than the others. He stood out for me. If you look at the team, you would think, actually, yes, we've had a bad day at the office, but you can't really put any blame on McArthur. really because I thought his overall performance was outstanding, and the main reason for that is just that box-to-box role he done in the side. You know, all the other players had their certain roles, whether they be offensive or defensive, but the fact that McCarver had that box-to-box role, and he done it excellently in terms of getting forward, getting back, and obviously making these interceptions along the way as well. That's really what impressed me. But personally, for me, any four of these players could have won it, and I think they do deserve to be on the shortlist. But McCarthy did, stand out for me. But do comment below with your thoughts, whether you think there's a player I've missed out, or whether you do disagree with, out of these four players, who I gave the overall award to. But congratulations, James McCarthy, with your first man of the match of the season. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my man of the match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson, Martin Kelly and Joe Ward following the game.
Martin, going back to the start of the game, what was it like for you finding out so last minute that you were going to be playing today?
You always get yourself ready for that. You know, when called upon, you need to be ready to do your job, and that's what you do as a professional. You know that it can happen in the warm-up, and I think Tonks felt his calf a little bit, so yeah, you haven't got time to think about much, just about what jobs you've got to do.
How do you feel you did in the game today?
Yeah, okay. I think we could have, maybe got something from the game, but it's a tough fixture coming to Watford. I know we've previously done well here, but today was a sort of game where it could have gone either way, and I felt like we was unlucky.
Do you think unlucky at the start with a lot of tough tackles going in, but the one on Wilf especially, just a yellow card given for that?
Yeah, I think so. I think teams are seeing Wilf as our star player now, and then they're obviously trying to nullify him at the start of games, doubling up or leaving late challenges on him. The ref's got to look after Wilf the way that all top players are looked after for top teams, and I think the refs are starting to look at that and doing that, and we've got to keep him fit every week. He's our main threat.
And right at the end there, Wardy's chances, did you think it was in when it left his head?
Yeah, I did. I thought it was in. It never, but I know he didn't mean to put it wide or whatever, so it's just one of them. We've got to take it and move on with the next game coming on Saturday at home to Southampton, who are a team that we look to compete with, and we want to get as many points as we can at home this season. That's got to be a fortress as such for us, as it was so well last season when Roy came in.
Joel, can we get your thoughts on the game?
Disappointing not to get something from the game, obviously. In the last dire seconds to miss that chance. It's one of them ones where it's just glanced off my head and just gone inches wide. But I think we deserve something out of the game. I think we may have started a little bit slow in the start of the second half, which allowed them to get a bit of momentum behind them. And then we gave ourselves a lot to do when we went 2-0 down.
Their second goal, do you feel it was just one of those fluke goals that you can't really do that much about?
Yeah, it's one of them ones where I'm sure it's a cross, but it's found its way in, and that's life really. And I think that we reacted well after that, got ourselves back into the game, and maybe should have snatched a point right at the end.
Going back to the start of the game, Martin Kelly had to come in at the very last minute. Is he one of those players that's really reliable, that you can always rely on him to step in at the last minute like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think we've got that depth in the squad. And Cals is a great professional, and he always prepares as if he's starting, because you have to, and you never know what might happen in a warm-up or the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes or first minute of the game. So you have to, if you are in the squad and on the bench, then you have to be ready to come on. And he came on and done brilliantly today, and I thought he done really well.
You feel it's tough for Wilf to play, especially when they play like here? It feels like the fans are just on at him the whole game.
Yeah, but I think that also feeds Wilf's ability to a certain degree. I think he feeds off that. When fans are getting on his back, he then knows he uses it to his advantage. And today, it's one of them ones where obviously he's got himself a goal, but unfortunately he couldn't lead us to all 3 points.
And finally, first start of the season for you today. Other than the header at the end, how would you rate your performance in the rest of the game?
Yeah, I think it was a steady game and done well. And listen, it's not just about my performance; it's about the teams and the fort. On the whole, we played well. It's just a few moments in the game that cost us. But we tried our best to get back in the game, and we dust ourselves down for Tuesday and Saturday, and make sure that we prepare and get ourselves ready for a battle.
Can we get your reaction to that game, please?
I thought the first half was very good. I thought we should really have come in leading by a goal or two, but they have Ben Foster to thank for that. I thought he made two really, really good saves, but I thought our first half performance was good. We limited them to very few chances and we looked good ourselves. We didn't get such a good start to the second half. When they scored the goal, of course, we were always going to be facing a more difficult task, and the second goal coming reasonably shortly afterwards, which was, in my opinion, a cross, not a shot at goal, drifting in. Suddenly, they're in the ascendancy, and we're looking at a very difficult task to bring it back to 2-2. But I thought we made a really good effort to bring it back to 2-2. I mean, we've scored the 2-1, and I think if the game had gone on longer, the way we were playing, we could easily have got that 2-2. And Wardy's chance in the last minute where his header goes narrowly wide. If that had gone in, I think we'd have been quite satisfied with our day's work, and I think we'd have been able to say too that we deserved it. But it didn't go in, as did not the first two chances in the first half. So as a result, you end up losing.
Martin Kelly came in at the last minute. Is there an update on James Tompkins at all?
No, he'll have a scan. Obviously, he felt his calf in the warm-up. I think he just thought it was a little bit of tightness, so he was hoping he could play through it, but it turned out to be more serious than that. We don't quite know how serious it will be until he has the scan. But of course, it's a great blow to lose him when we'd already lost Aaron Bissaka. So to lose two guys of our back four and have to ask Martin and Joel to come in and do a job against a good team, it was a tough ask for them. But I think both of them did well.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson, Martin Kelly and Joe Ward had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Watford. But make sure to come back next week from a post-match review of the game against Swansea. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.